England that sees the more persistent weather. Further west and further southwest, brighter skies, some sunny spells coming through and 17 or 18 Celsius, but a few showers will break out even in the west and the southwest by the afternoon and early evening. The more persistent wet weather, though, eases away from eastern and northern England. It sticks around for eastern Scotland, pushing into the Northern Isles by the end of Tuesday night. Clear spells for some further south, but a lot of cloud cover and again some mist and murk, particularly around western and southern shores. So a gloomy start to Wednesday for many and a damp start there for the far north and northeast of Scotland. One or two showers as we begin things, but through the day on Wednesday, skies brighten, the sun comes through and we'll see more widely scattered showers breaking out. Thursday, many places dry away from the far west.
Europe is in the grip of the most devastating humanitarian crisis since World War II.
The people of Ukraine are facing unimaginable suffering
as their homes are destroyed and their loved ones are killed.
Millions of people are being forced to flee for their lives, carrying only their children, their pets, and the clothes on their back.
The pain, loss and destruction grows by the day.
The people of Ukraine urgently need our help.
Already a vast humanitarian operation is underway. Britain's Disasters Emergency Committee, or DEC, brings together 15 leading aid charities to respond to overseas disasters quickly and efficiently. These charities include the British Red Cross, CARE, Oxfam, Save the Children and World Vision.
Their teams are working on the ground in Ukraine and neighbouring countries to bring vital aid to those who need it most. If you can spare it, your gift to the DEC's humanitarian appeal will go a really long way.
£10 provides essential hygiene supplies for a person for a month.
£50 provides blankets for 4 families.
£100 provides emergency food for 2 families per month.
It's easy to give. You can donate online at dec.org.uk or call the 24-hour donation line on 0370 60 60 900. If you prefer to send a cheque, please post it to the Ukraine Humanitarian Appeal, PO Box 999, London, EC 3A 3AA. To give £10 on your mobile, simply text the word crisis to 70150. Standard network charges apply for calls and you must be 16 or over. Texts are charged at the standard network rate and your £10 donation will be added to your bill.
100% of your donation goes directly to the DEC to save lives and deliver critical support where it's needed.
Hello there, good afternoon. Welcome to Brazier, fast-paced news from 4 until 6. Coming up this hour, why a jury took only 18 minutes today to convict an Islamist who stabbed to death the MP Sir David Amess. Mark White will discuss how we stop the killer using prison as a place to radicalise other inmates. Also, Britain's most celebrated head teacher, Catherine Berbel-Singh, will be on the show as a survey shows that half of all teachers want out of the profession in the next 5 years. And as fly tipping goes berserk, why it's time to stop charging for using the council dump. All that plus Gareth Wyn-Jones live on lambing season in North Wales and the latest on Rishi Sunak's green card. Alongside me throughout the show, the writer Ella Whelan, but first the headlines with Polly.
Colin, thank you. It's just after 4 o'clock and I'm Polly Middlehurst in the GB newsroom. The top story today, Ali Harbi Ali has been found guilty of murdering Sir David Amess. The 26-year-old repeatedly stabbed the Conservative MP in his Essex constituency last October. It took the jury just 18 minutes to return a unanimous verdict. Harbi was also found guilty of preparing acts of terrorism. He's due to be sentenced on Wednesday. Detective Superintendent Dominic Murphy says Ali was self-radicalised.
It's important to remember that Ali Harbi Ali's attack was an attack against democracy. Sir David was helping the community of Essex. at the time of his murder. And so I hope this trial helps to bring some closure for the family.
Well, the two unarmed police officers who tackled Sir David's murderer have been given a bravery award. Essex Police say PC Ryan Curtis and PC Scott James were awarded the Merit Star in a private ceremony in November. Well, in other news today, the President of Austria has told the President of Russia the conflict in Ukraine must end, telling him that in a war, only losers are on both sides. Karl Nehammer is the first EU country leader to meet Vladimir Putin in Moscow since the invasion began. Ukraine, meanwhile, is bracing itself for a new attack in the east of the country, with President Zelensky warning Russia is readying tens of thousands of troops for their next offensive. A new video has also emerged showing the extent of damage at the National Theatre in Mariupol in the south of Ukraine, which was destroyed during an airstrike, killing at least 300 people.
And there can be no hope that Russia will simply stop on its own. And there can be no hope that reason will prevail and the Russian authorities will simply refuse to continue this war. Russia can only be forced to do so, can only be forced to seek peace, be forced to stop torturing people, be forced to respect the independent life of the neighbouring nations, be forced to leave the territory of Ukraine.
Volodymyr Zelensky there of Ukraine. Well, the Prime Minister's spokeswoman says Boris Johnson has agreed to the Chancellor's request of an independent review of his finances. That comes after it emerged Rishi Sunak held a US green card whilst he was in office and that his wife holds non-domicile status. He says he followed the rules and hopes the review will provide further clarity. The Labour leader, Sir Keir Starmer, says the timing of the revelations couldn't be worse.
At the very time, in the middle of a cost of living crisis, when everybody is feeling the pinch, and last week the government said we're going to put up tax on working people, we now discover that members of the Cabinet have been using schemes to reduce their own tax. It's very, very straightforward. It's a real sense of fairness and transparency here that's in play.
It's Keir Starmer. Well, from today, millions of people in the UK will see a rise in their state pensions, but it won't be enough to match the growing cost of living. Pensions and universal credit benefits have increased by 3.1%, but the Office for Budget Responsibility says inflation could hit a 40-year high of 8.7% later this year. These pensioners in Pontypool in South Wales say the financial boost doesn't cover the cost of living.
The pension's gone up maybe £4 a week if you're lucky. At the moment, my gas and electric has gone up £95, and that's not going to help me at all.
People are talking about heating or eating, that's the tagline, and I feel very strongly about that. As you get older, you need a warm house, you need good nutritional food, and it's not going to cover the cost.
Pensioners in Wales speaking there about the cost of living. Well, in France, Emmanuel Macron is due to face Marine Le Pen in the second round of the French presidential elections. Both were seen back on the campaign trail in northern France and Paris this morning. The incumbent president and his right-wing rival came out on top in Sunday's first round vote, setting up a repeat of the 2017 runoff. A number of polls are predicting Macron will win, but with a tight margin. All the major candidates in the election, bar one, have called for tactical voting against Marine Le Pen. Pakistan's new Prime Minister-elect says he wants good ties with Europe. Shahbaz Sharif, who was the opposition leader, is expected to remain in power until the general election in August next year. He was elected after Imran Khan was ousted as Prime Minister in a vote of no confidence on Saturday. The move has triggered protests right across the country. And here, Her Majesty the Queen has revealed she was left feeling very tired and exhausted during her bout of coronavirus in February. The monarch made a video call to the Royal London Hospital this week, sympathising with a former COVID patient who lost his brother and father to the illness. You're with GB News. We'll bring you more news as it happens. Now back to Brazier.
Ali Harbi Ali has been found guilty of murdering Sir David Amess. He stabbed the former Southend MP more than 20 times, a court heard, and then admitted being a terrorist in police interviews, despite denying murder later on. It took the jury 18 minutes to decide that he was indeed a murderer. Outside the Old Bailey is Mark White, our Home and Security editor. Mark, welcome to you. The dust is just beginning to settle on this verdict now, and there are questions, I suppose, which begin to rear their heads. How will we stop him radicalising others in prison? How much do we know about this process of a lone wolf becoming radicalised? What lessons do we draw from this horrible case?
Yes, well, I mean, in terms of stopping others being radicalised in prison, this is an issue that the authorities are constantly grappling with, and they will be grappling with the addition of yet another terrorist prisoner in there. We only need to think back a few short years to the brother of Hashim Abedi, the Manchester bomber, or the Hashim Abedi, I should say, the brother of the Manchester bomber, who led a cell of radicals within Belmarsh prison, plotting to murder a prison officer in that prison, kidnapped him, tried to kill him. Luckily, the other members of prison staff got to them before they could do him any real harm. But it shows you that there are those individuals who are out there still mixing freely with other radical individuals in prison and radicalising others who are perhaps not of a radical bent. And then, of course, there's a question of how do you know whether anyone has properly reformed before they are released back into society? We had the case in 2017 of Usman Khan, of course, who went on to launch that attack at Fishmongers Hall on London Bridge, killing 2 innocent people who had been there trying to do their best to help reform Usman Khan. Well, he had played along with the authorities and pretended that he had reformed and he was no longer a danger to society. Now, it's likely that Ali Harbi Ali, the man who has now been convicted of the murder of Sir David Amess, will be given a whole life tariff. He will never see the light of day again, so he is unlikely ever to be a risk to the public. But he was contemptuous to the last, Colin, refusing to stand in the dock as the jury passed their verdicts. I've been looking back at the case, the murder of a very well-respected and loved local politician.
Mark, we're going to run your report in the next hour, but for now we'll say thank you. Mark White there outside the Old Bailey. Mark, thanks very much indeed. Ella Whelan is alongside me. One point Mark didn't touch upon there, Ella, was the extent to which MPs, our parliamentarians now, will look to their personal safety in the wake of this Islamist killing.
Which is obviously a natural response. I mean, one of the things that made David Amess so remarkable as an MP was that he was actually one of the few that celebrated the idea of having open surgeries. Indeed, he was quite vocal throughout the pandemic of the need to, as soon as possible, get back to having face-to-face, low security, not with any kind of barriers in the way of just him talking to people. And I don't think we should do down the positives of that. And, within reason, I think that politicians, it's their job to be able to facilitate that, and being completely sympathetic to the fact that this will obviously have frightened them in the same way that what happened to Joe Cox frightened a lot of people. But I think it's really important to point out one thing, which is in the wake of Amess's murder, very soon after it happened, when, we didn't know the full details, but there was most people, being constricted by what they could say legally, had an idea of what had happened.
It was a bizarre weekend, wasn't it? After the weekend, when all the MPs were saying we've got a temporal language, and everybody thought, what are you talking about?
And actually, there was, in particular, Marc Francois was suggesting David's Law, which would be a law around anonymity online. And there was a great link made between the trolling of MPs, people saying, unpleasant things to people online, and this murder. Now, there was absolutely no evidence that there was any link of that. And we now know that the details of the case show that he was particularly targeting Amess for his political views. And I think that, with the greatest amount of caution and sympathy, we should say that events like this don't allow MPs to insulate themselves from the public. The public is very different from terrorists. And I think suggesting that there is links here with a kind of general sentiment of a nastiness among the public and how they discuss politics or how they interact with MPs.
More specific than that. It was about the fact that MPs were seen as using intemperate language in the chamber about politics and politicians. That was seen as a sort of, precursor to violence.
Yeah, and I think that's really wrong, because when you cannot hold up the actions of one individual who has very specific Islamist, extremist, violent views and tar either MPs who use colourful language in Parliament or indeed people on Twitter who say things with that, that's a danger to democracy as much, or at least on a scale, as Islamist terror.
Ella, for now, thanks very much. Well, a year ago, sort of staying with politics, a year ago, many people, and not just Conservative voters, thought the next occupant of number 10 would be Rishi Sunak. But if a week is a long time in politics, then 12 months is an eternity. Boris Johnson's fortunes have revived, it seems. The Chancellor's star, by contrast, is in free fall. Today, he asked for an official inquiry to clear up questions about his tax affairs. At the weekend, removal vans were seen at number 11 to take away the belongings of Aksata Murty, the Chancellor's wife, whose tax status has been the subject of leaks. Perhaps most damagingly, Rishi Sunak's commitment to Britain itself has been called into question after it emerged he held a green card that would allow him to live in America until October last year. That's when he relinquished that green card. Let's turn to the Shadow Minister for Levelling Up, Alex Norris MP, who joins us now. Technology was missing. There you go. Alex Norris, thanks so much for your time. Obviously, you're going to agree as an opposition politician on the shadow front bench that Rishi Sunak's star has waned. There are some people a little bit uncomfortable about the way his wife's been dragged into this.
Well, I'm not sure that's a fair characterisation. This is a Chancellor who has put up taxes for the British people up to historic levels, 15 different tax rises meaning that we're all, £2,500 worse off under his chancellorship. All of us have to declare what our spouses do and their income. I think it's reasonable that for the individual who's put up taxes in this way, that there's going to be some accountability for, in his family circumstances, for what seem to be significant efforts to avoid paying tax. I think that's entirely reasonable that those questions would be asked.
And she's answered the question, hasn't she? She will now pay UK tax even on foreign earnings in India.
Well, but this is part of the problem, Colin, because when the Chancellor came out last week, we were told that these arrangements were inevitable ones that stemmed from her citizenship and that there was no question. And then actually, it turns out a number of days later, something could have been done about them. And then, of course, we hear, very specific news about the Chancellor himself holding a green card and, all that implies. So actually, there is quite a bit here. And being really honest, Colin, I'm not the one who's referred him to Lord Geidt. He's referred himself. So he himself is clear that that we've not got to the bottom of this. And it's right that we do. And of course, actually, I think the bigger issue is too that Sajid Javid has said he also used similar schemes as well as using trusts. That was the previous Chancellor, the current Health Secretary. I think it's reasonable now that the entire cabinet, who of course are collectively responsible for taxation in this country, are clear themselves. Has anyone else been using this status? Is anyone else aggressively using trusts, for example, in tax havens? I think these are legitimate questions for people to know the answer to, and I think we need to have it.
You mentioned the green card and, quote, all that implies. Is there a question mark about his patriotism?
Well, I can't see into his heart. I don't know him personally, but what I do know is that a green card status is saying, well, I intend to make my home in America. There may be times that I'm out of the country, but that will be for a time-limited period. And that to me seems quite strange. If you're the Chancellor, if you're a member of Parliament, that to me says your full commitment is to serving your constituents and trying to make Parliament the best place that it possibly can be. I think those two things are in tension. Clearly, he does too, because he ceased that arrangement, as you say, in October of last year. But I think, again, I'd like to know the answer to why, for so many years, he thought that was the right thing to do. And again, is this the case for anybody else in the cabinet? I think it's legitimate that, especially given the burdens people are under, we find out if we are really all in this together or not.
I know Labour's been asking questions today about this idea of his assets being in a blind trust. When he became, I think, Chief Secretary to the Treasury, he put his investments into a blind trust so that there can be no conflict of interest about decisions he was part of at the Treasury that might then affect those investments. That seems the proper way of going about things. It's hard to think of another way of going about things unless you said to highly successful, highly wealthy people, you've got no place in British politics. I mean, in a sense, if you're going to have somebody at the Treasury who understands financial markets, you want them to have been successful. You want them to be sufficiently wealthy to have to require a blind trust. It's going to give them an understanding based on success of how finance, commerce and investments work.
Yeah, I think Parliament's at its best when it reflects the British people, and as you say, has very talented, very successful people. But you'd want to think that they want that their priority would be on whether prior to Parliament growing their business and paying taxes accordingly, or whether the interest is trying to get as much of their interests offshored, perhaps in tax havens, to pay as little as possible, because that's revealing about character. As you say, he put that into a blind trust. That seems wise. I mean, a lot of this, as it will be to listeners, is a long way away from my frame of reference in life. It just simply isn't likely to be something that I'm concerned about. But it is reasonable that we know, on individuals with significant earnings who hold public office, who put up taxes on the British people, that they pay their tax in this country. I think that's pretty reasonable to know. And all we're asking, and indeed all he has asked himself, so he clearly thinks it's a legitimate question, is that we establish the facts in this case. And I think that's what needs to happen.
Alex Norris, really good to spare the time today with us. Thanks very much indeed. Thanks for your thoughts.
Thanks, Colin.
Ella Whelan is alongside me. Just to tap into something we didn't get into there with Alex Norris, I was talking at the weekend to somebody about Rishi Sunak in the context. I'm a big Sunak fan. I love the attention to the detail, the grasp of detail he's clearly got. Wonderful administrator, I would argue. I think would make a decent fist of being Prime Minister. Is there a question, if he becomes Prime Minister, it looks less likely than it did, about being married to a foreign national, an Indian national? India currently, its state of relations with the UK, not brilliant. Look at Russia. Am I barking up the wrong tree even asking the question?
You're not barking up the wrong tree asking the question. I think I'd probably not be as nervous about that. But what I think will cut through with people and is potentially a problem is this idea of, whether it's relation to Sunak's green card or indeed the fact of the kind of dual citizenship, dual nationality, is this picture of a kind of global supranational power couple that doesn't really have any roots anywhere. And Norris made a very good point that if you are a member of Parliament and indeed the Prime Minister, all your energies and efforts and loyalties and all the rest of it are meant to be with the nation that you have the most political power over. You're not meant to have kind of one eye on somewhere else, wondering if the grass is greener in a different country, or indeed, I can't get myself too worked up about the tax dodging question. Maybe call me a cynic, but I mean, you're talking about sort of financial elite. It's sort of par for the course with what a lot of them do. The problem is if you have a chancellor who's head of a particular area of government, which has for the last few years been really vocal in wanting to crack down on benefit fraud, on tax dodging for the kind of those of us at the kind of pleb level who are really only fiddling a few hundred quid, then you can't then just be outraged at the fact that your wife or yourself is getting pulled up when it's not thousands but millions of pounds.
Just to be clear, Ella was not confessing to fiddling a few hundred quid there. You were just notionally.
In the abstract.
We're going to move on, mercifully. Households will no longer have to pay to get rid of DIY waste under plans set out by government to change the rules that currently allow some local authorities to charge for DIY waste from households. Under the proposals, household DIYers, interesting noun, would not be charged to get rid of waste, including plasterboards, bricks and bath units. This is part of a fresh move to crack down on fly tipping, which has increased since the beginning of the pandemic. It's been increasing for longer than that, I think. The media manager at the Countryside Alliance is Mo Metcalfe-Fisher, who joins me now. Mo, welcome to you. How strong is the link between the fact that people are now being charged to use these council dumps and the quantity of fly tipping, especially in the countryside?
Well, our big problem has always been about people that aren't going to the tips, but actually are using rogue traders to carry out waste disposal on their behalf. Sometimes unknowingly, sometimes knowingly giving it and putting it into the hands of the wrong people who are charging a very small fee to take a load of rubbish away and drive a few miles into the countryside and dumping it all over usually farmers' land, farmers who unfortunately therefore have to pay loads of money to pick it up, sometimes pay for the damages that the fly tippers have caused, breaking down gates and driving all over their crops. And then they've got the horrible task of not only having to pay for all of that, but if they don't do that, they could be fined and prosecuted themselves. Yes, it's good. This is really welcome from the government today. It's definitely a step in the right direction. It's going to make life easier for all of us who are carrying out DIY. Not that I'm one of them right now, but for anyone that's got that plan for the Easter weekend, it's going to, well, not this year, but next year, that third of councils who are still charging for DIY, that's going to hopefully come down. But right, I said, for us, the big problem is awareness and making sure that people know their responsibilities when they use traders, because they're a big problem for us in the countryside.
Yeah, and as you say, it will be astonishing to some people to know that landowners, farmers most obviously, are on the hook for this, not just repairing any damage, but actually, if they leave it there, the burden of proof is on them to establish they didn't do it.
Yeah, it's really hard for them. And ultimately, just like with anything like illegal poaching, if it comes to the farmer to have to confront fly tippers, it can also be really, really dangerous for them. You know, these are people out committing a crime. They don't really want to be caught, and they're not going to take kindly to someone trying to film them or expose them. And, you know, it makes life so difficult for them. And one of the things that we're constantly trying to tell people, as much as it's tempting to get the video camera out or the phone out and start filming people, just be really, really careful, because they ultimately don't want to get caught.
Mo Metcalfe-Fisher, we're going to leave it there, but thanks ever so much for your time. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Coming up to 24 minutes past 4. Coming up, the Queen reveals COVID left her very tired and exhausted. Our GBNews royal reporter Cameron Walker will be joining us to talk about Her Majesty after the break.
Europe is in the grip of the most devastating humanitarian crisis since World War II.
The people of Ukraine are facing unimaginable suffering
as their homes are destroyed and their loved ones are killed.
Millions of people are being forced to flee for their lives, carrying only their children, their pets, and the clothes on their back.
The pain, loss, and destruction grows by the day.
The people of Ukraine urgently need our help.
Already a vast humanitarian operation is underway. Britain's Disasters Emergency Committee, or DEC, brings together 15 leading aid charities to respond to overseas disasters quickly and efficiently. These charities include the British Red Cross, CARE, Oxfam, Save the Children, and World Vision.
Their teams are working on the ground in Ukraine and neighbouring countries to bring vital aid to those who need it most. If you can spare it, your gift to the DEC's humanitarian appeal will go a really long way.
£10 provides essential hygiene supplies for a person for a month.
£50 provides blankets for 4 families.
£100 provides emergency food for 2 families per month.
It's easy to give. You can donate online at dec.org.uk or call the 24-hour donation line on 0370 60 60 900. If you prefer to send a cheque, please post it to the Ukraine Humanitarian Appeal, PO Box 999, London, EC 3A 3AA. To give £10 on your mobile, simply text the word crisis to 70150. Standard network charges apply for calls, and you must be 16 or over. Texts are charged at the standard network rate, and your £10 donation will be added to your bill.
100% of your donation goes directly to the DEC to save lives and deliver critical support where it's needed.
Well, the Queen has revealed how she felt after being diagnosed with COVID. It comes after she announced that she was withdrawing from the traditional Easter Maunday church service happening this coming Thursday. Let's turn to our royal reporter, Cameron Walker, who is here in the studio. Cameron, we know that the Queen's deep Christian faith, very important to her. We're into Holy Week and the week leading up to Easter. She'd want to be part of it.
She certainly would, and I think Buckingham Palace tries to keep the medical details of Her Majesty the Queen pretty private. But what she said in this clip there is that she felt very tired and exhausted when she had coronavirus. And I believe we've got the clip. Should we take a listen?
Better now. I'm getting there. I'm recovering. I'm much better. I mean, I've recently left the wheelchair, so I'm walking about now. I'm glad that you're getting better, and it does leave one very tired and exhausted, doesn't it? This horrible pandemic. It's been very nice to be able to join you and also to hear what happened and how well it has been achieved. Thank you very much indeed, all of you.
So she was on a virtual visit to the Royal London Hospital, which is patroned, and she was opening the new Queen Elizabeth unit, which is an 155-bed critical care unit. It's one of the biggest in the country, and it was built in just 5 weeks in response to the huge surge of patients in response to the coronavirus pandemic. And the reason she said to the patient that she was tired and exhausted is she was speaking to somebody who himself had suffered with coronavirus and was actually put on a ventilator, so she was sympathising with the patient. But we know that the Queen has had growing mobility issues, and I think this virtual visit was a chance for her in a more modern way to continue to meet the British public and because she's got mobility issues, and it was a way for her to meet the British public virtually rather than in person.
Do you know what, Cameron? I've been really struck by, I mean, it's no surprise, really. She's been addressing the camera since the 1950s, if not before.
Yeah.
She's got, more miles under the belt than you or I combined and many others when it comes to speaking to the camera. Of course she's comfortable doing it. But nonetheless, she's had to do a lot of it during lockdown, during those lockdown months, indeed 2 years, really, of addressing people from Windsor on the end of a Zoom call. And for somebody of her age to sort of grow adept at it, it's not to be sniffed at.
Yeah, exactly. And, she has decided to pull out of the Maundy service this Thursday. It's a very important event in the royal calendar, as you well know, Colin, and her son, the Prince of Wales, is going to be taking her place for the first time ever. Now, from speaking to royal sources from inside the palace, I think this was more of a logistical reason. The Queen didn't want to commit because the orders of service had to be printed, and Her Majesty was, she wanted to avoid any misunderstanding, and pulling out last minute would very much overshadow the events on the day. So I think she's being sensible, she knows what she can and can't do, and she's perhaps leaving it to the younger generations to take on more responsibility.
And doesn't want to let people down, does she? Cameron, for now, thanks very much indeed. Cameron Walker. Coming up, a left-wing teachers' union says half of teachers want to quit after COVID. UK's strictest head teacher, Catherine Birbal-Singh, will join me to talk about that and any other stories she wants to talk about. She's always worth listening to on almost any subject imaginable. But first, the latest news headlines for you in one.
Colin, thank you. It's 4:30. I'm Polly Middlehurst with your latest news headlines. As you've been hearing today, Ali Harbi Ali has been found guilty of murdering Sir David Amess. The 26-year-old repeatedly stabbed the Conservative MP in his Essex constituency last October. It took the jury just 18 minutes to return a unanimous verdict. Ali was also found guilty of preparing acts of terrorism. He's due to be sentenced on Wednesday. The Austrian Chancellor says his meeting with Vladimir Putin in Moscow was direct, open and tough. It's the first time an EU leader has held face-to-face talks with Russia's president since the war started. Meanwhile, Ukraine is bracing itself for a new attack in the east, with President Zelensky warning Russia is readying tens of thousands of troops for their next offensive. New video has also emerged showing the extent of damage at the National Theatre in Mariupol, which was destroyed during an airstrike, killing at least 300 people. Here, the Prime Minister's spokeswoman says Boris Johnson has agreed to the Chancellor's request of an independent review of his finances. It's come after it emerged Rishi Sunak held a US green card whilst in office and that his wife holds non-domicile status. The Chancellor says he followed the rules and hopes the review will provide further clarity. And a Conservative MP has been found guilty of sexually assaulting a 15-year-old boy at a house in Staffordshire in 2008. Southwark Crown Court heard how Imran Ahmad Khan forced the teenager to drink gin and tonic, dragged him upstairs and asked him to watch pornography before the attack. From today, millions of people in the UK will see a rise in their state pensions, but analysts say it won't be enough to match the growing cost of living. Pensions and universal credit benefits have increased by 3.1%, but the Office for Budget Responsibility says inflation could hit a 40-year high of 8.7% later this year. On TV, online and on your radio via DAB+, you're with GB News. We'll have more from Brazier after the break.
Europe is in the grip of the most devastating humanitarian crisis since World War II.
The people of Ukraine are facing unimaginable suffering
as their homes are destroyed and their loved ones are killed.
Millions of people are being forced to flee for their lives, carrying only their children, their pets, and the clothes on their back.
The pain, loss and destruction grows by the day.
The people of Ukraine urgently need our help.
Already a vast humanitarian operation is underway. Britain's Disasters Emergency Committee, or DEC, brings together 15 leading aid charities to respond to overseas disasters quickly and efficiently. These charities include the British Red Cross, CARE, Oxfam, Save the Children and World Vision.
Their teams are working on the ground in Ukraine and neighbouring countries to bring vital aid to those who need it most. If you can spare it, your gift to the DEC's humanitarian appeal will go a really long way.
£10 provides essential hygiene supplies for a person for a month.
£50 provides blankets for 4 families.
£100 provides emergency food for 2 families per month.
It's easy to give. You can donate online at dec.org.uk or call the 24-hour donation line on 0370 60 60 900. If you prefer to send a cheque, please post it to the Ukraine Humanitarian Appeal, PO Box 999, London, EC 3A 3AA. To give £10 on your mobile, simply text the word crisis to 70150. Standard network charges apply for calls and you must be 16 or over. Texts are charged at the standard network rate and your £10 donation will be added to your bill.
100% of your donation goes directly to the DEC to save lives and deliver critical support where it's needed.
It's nearly 25 to 5. Nearly half of teachers in England are planning to quit within the next 5 years due to a surge in workload, constant monitoring and paperwork, according to a poll. The issues have been caused partly by on-off COVID school closures and other pandemic bureaucracy. The poll, commissioned by the National Education Union, I think some would probably see that as a left-leaning union, who lobbied for schools to stay shut for longer. It claimed, the union, the poll I should say, claimed that 44% of teachers plan to leave the profession by 2027. Joining me now is Catherine Birbalsingh, the head teacher, school founder and education reformer. Catherine Birbalsingh, welcome to you. These polls, I wonder if teachers are any worse than any other profession for saying they're disillusioned, it's not worked out how they hoped it would do and they plan to quit. Or are teachers particularly bad at saying they will quit, but then actually not doing so?
No, I think and it's not just since COVID, this has always been the case with teaching, that a number of people join the profession and then leave. And they leave predominantly for 2 big reasons, workload and behavior issues. And the 2 are really tied to each other. Obviously, if you spend a lot of time chasing behavior issues, you're not able to spend time planning your lessons and other things that you would prefer to be doing.
I know we've talked before and you've written extensively, and the proof is in the pudding at the Michaela Academy, that the discipline aspect of it, it's when certainly teachers that I talk to, you work with them, you live and breathe it, that very often that's the thing that really, even the most wide-eyed idealists are undermined by the friction on corridors and in classrooms with difficult pupils.
Yes. Well, when years ago when I was teaching, all the time, and now I'm a head teacher, I would always leave an hour after school every day so I could get on the phone and ring parents, either to say good things or bad things about the children. But it was necessary to do that in order to help the behavior in my lessons. Because if I rang home and said good things, that meant the next day if I ran home and said something bad, the parent would be on side with me. But it was something I had to spend a lot of time investing in. And teachers spend a lot of time writing up behavior incidents, chasing up over detentions, children aren't showing up, and so on. And unfortunately, for instance, I get a lot of stick for expecting good discipline and having high standards for behavior. At school, everything's wonderful. I mean, outside of school, through the media and so on, people sort of take a dim view. And actually, it's by having strict behavior systems that head teachers and senior teams can support their teachers, which will then bring down their workload, you see. So in the end, having a more free-for-all, actually, I would argue, drives teachers out of the profession.
That's interesting, because when you listen to teaching unions, they say, OK, the paperwork, the organisation outside of lessons, the exams, the workload has increased and increased and increased, and the school holidays don't mean anything anymore. But actually what you're saying is that, yes, that may be part of the answer there, but actually ill discipline creates its own workload and bureaucracy, and that all takes time too.
Yeah, you have to record it. You have to write up the incidents. You might have to then meet with the parent. There's huge amounts of work increases because of behavior. And actually, if the unions are reporting this as a problem, that teachers want to leave because of workload, the unions can also sometimes say the behavior isn't a problem in our schools. They're often kind of out there saying behavior is just fine. And when they do that, I often think they're undermining their teacher members, because behavior is not fine for all teachers. And it shouldn't be like that. School leaders like me need to be held to account. We need to have systems in our schools that better support our teachers so that the discipline isn't the main thing that they're doing all the time. Also, if you have a school as a school leader where the behavior is excellent because you've got such high standards and it just works, it means my mind is freed up to think about how can I reduce the workload for teachers in other ways, because it won't just be behavior that increases their workload. It's also teaching requires a huge amount of work. It is a very demanding profession. And people like me in positions of leadership need to be able to think about how to reduce things for teachers. But if all I'm doing is running around with the daily behavior incidents that can happen in some schools, then I don't have the headspace to think about that.
Yeah, I just wonder if there's, it's a really difficult one to measure, but I just wonder whether disillusionment amongst teachers is growing. I mean, it's a function of all professions, isn't it? People go into accountancy or nursing or whatever it is and find it's not quite what they thought it would be when they're in their late teens or their early 20s, and actually they find the appeals of becoming an estate agent grow more attractive, whatever it is. Has it got worse? Is there a sense in which perhaps it's held up to some utopian idealistic standard? The reality is so different from what they expect that more numbers are not making it all the way through.
I'm not sure it's the expectations necessarily, but I don't think people realize just how bad behavior can be. And when you go into teaching, you want to have impact on the children you're teaching. You spend ages preparing a lovely lesson for them. You want them to enjoy it and to learn something. But if the behavior is poor, and at the end, the children haven't learned very much, you feel rather useless as a teacher. And in order for any of us to enjoy our jobs, you need to feel like you have purpose. You need to see the impact that you are having on a daily basis on the children. Behavior can undermine that feeling of purpose and that feeling of impact. And so, I'd say my teachers work hard, but they see the impact, the positive impact on the children every single day. So they're happy to put in all that hard work because they're seeing the difference they're making to the children's lives. If you don't see that, and as I say, behavior can be a huge part of that, then you feel like, well, what's the point? Why am I kidding myself when in the end the children are not learning what I want them to learn?
Catherine, I was going to ask you a question about I'm completely on board with what you're talking about in relation to discipline, but is there a kind of broader trend here with, even when there's not a problem, there being a kind of idea of teaching baked in, that teachers need to go beyond what you've just said, teaching kids what they need to learn in terms of content and knowledge, but playing a much more social, pastoral role in children's life, which, you know, in generations gone past, maybe they didn't. I only worked as a school office administrator for a number of years, but it gave me an insight into all the extra stuff teachers have to do. So getting involved in family life, thinking about children's well-being, not in a kind of normal way, but in this sort of like almost another curriculum sort of way. And you know, as well as the thing you've highlighted with the instances of bad behaviour that might happen here and there, is there a kind of baked-in problem with teachers' role expanding almost to teacher, social worker, you know, life's problem solver?
Yeah, well, I wouldn't say the bad behavior incidents are here and there. I'd say that they're a lot more common than we like to admit as a society. But I think this has been for some time. So, you know, I've been in this business for over 20 years. It has always been the case that teachers are also social workers, are also supporting families. Like I say, I used to ring home families. I'd leave an hour at the end of the day, just put aside that hour just so I could make calls. And that was, you know, 20 years ago. I mean, the fact is that this has always happened. I say always. In my lifetime. And I think that's okay. I think that teachers accept that as long as they're seeing impact. And I think that impact is reduced the more behavior issues you have. Like, it doesn't mean that there are constant fights, but if there's constant low-level disruption in your class where children aren't listening and the teacher's having to say, silence everyone looking at me, and this exasperation, and you're thinking, gosh, I've planned this whole lesson and the time is just flying away and I'm not really teaching them very much, and then they're failing their tests at the end of the week or at the end of the month, and you're thinking, why am I doing this? It's that lack of purpose. And that's important for anyone to feel fulfilled at the end of the day. Why do you go into teaching? Because you love your subject, because you love children, because you want to build relationships with them and you want to teach them. And if you find that you're not really teaching them, partly because of the behavior, partly because of the teaching methods that you might have been instructed to use by some of the teacher training institutions, by the culture that we've got, which is one which is very progressive, where we feel the children should lead the learning as opposed to the teacher being the authority in the class and leading the learning from the front. All of this undermines the teacher's sense of authority and the respect the children will have for the teacher. And so sometimes teachers can undermine themselves without even realizing, because they're more progressive than they are traditional. And then the children don't necessarily listen, and then they can get frustrated. And in the end, they think, why am I doing this job? Because teaching is hard. It's really challenging. It's exhausting. It's physically demanding. It's intellectually demanding. You're having to spin loads of plates all at the same time. And to do it well, I tell you, it takes a lot. But my teachers, they love putting that time in because they see the impact. And I keep coming back to that, which is that if you don't see much impact, you don't see purpose in your life. And that will be, in the end, the reason why you're leaving, because you're thinking, all I do is fill out paperwork for these behavior incidents. Why am I bothering? What I wanted to do was teach, and I'm not able to teach.
Catherine, you always make it sound so simple. I mean, I know it's not, but you seem to have found a way to make it work, and an example that it feels like many other schools ought to be following. Catherine Birbalsingh, as ever, really appreciate your time, and thanks ever so much for what you're doing in that sector. Now, after NATO's suggestion that Finland and Sweden could join the alliance this summer, Russia has said the move would not bring stability to Europe. The Kremlin spokesman, Dmitry Peskov, told reporters that, quote, the alliance remains a tool geared towards confrontation. US defense officials have said that Russia's war in Ukraine has been a massive strategic blunder, which is likely to bring NATO enlargement about. The former head of counter-terrorism at the Ministry of Defence is Major General Chip Chapman, who joins us now. Chip Chapman, thanks for your time as ever. Should we focus a little bit on what's happening in the east, in Donbass, how you think that's likely to unfold?
Well, I think what the Russians are doing is sensible from a strategic perspective. You know, you can't be strong everywhere and you end up being weak everywhere. So they've decided to cut their losses, abandon really the north and almost everything to the west of the Dnieper, which is an amazing achievement by the Ukraine, and to pour more combat power into securing what I think are their minimum objectives to get to a ceasefire, which are to capture the Luhansk and Donetsk oblasts, that's the administrative areas, to take Mariupol and to join a land bridge to Crimea. And that will be their negotiating position, I think, should they do that. And I still think that's a big should, because a terrible army doesn't end up being a good army in quick time. And the Ukrainians will still chew their logistics to bits. And it looks to me that they're trying to do an envelopment rather than what people say there's supposed to be an encirclement. And that envelopment is sort of taking place from the Izium, Sloviansk access down the M03 sort of main highway and the flanks either side of that. There's a lot of fighting to be done there because after 6 weeks, they've not really improved their position, the Russians, in those two areas against the Ukrainians. And of course, they've not really improved their position there in the last 8 years because that is the place which has been the area of contention since 2014.
One thing he's got on his side, Putin, is in a sense he can decide. No outside power. He can decide in terms of how he sells it to his own people what victory looks like. Some people are saying he'll try and aim for May Day. He'll try and aim for, making some sort of announcement out there overlooking Red Square. I think there's an anniversary of the relief of Stalingrad. You can see what punctuation mark in terms of Russian history he might want to use to say, actually, we've achieved what I set out we would achieve.
I think that's a really dangerous thing for him if he tries to go for a date. And we've really seen over the last week or so a left and right of arc here. As some people have said, this will be over in 3 weeks. And General Mark Milley, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff in America, has said this could go on for years. So there's your left and right of arc. Now, what Putin has in his favour are two things. Firstly, he seems to have the population internally, because of the propaganda, still on his side. That doesn't seem to have gone down. Secondly, there don't seem to be major fractures in the sort of those who protect him and surround him in the government and the oligarchs. The key weakness he might have is actually the ones you cannot fool are the soldiers. And it really is a case of how they fight, how well will they fight, and will they fight? And it could be the case that they will not fight and they will give up fighting. They already culminated in the north, and that is his biggest weakness in what we would call the Clausewitzian Trinity. If one of those Trinitarian parts falls, the other two then collapse beside it.
Chip Chapman, for now, thanks very much indeed. Ella Whelan alongside me to reflect on Finland and Sweden. You've got something to say about that?
Well, it's just that there's, this question of NATO expansion has been a tricky subject. Initially at this outbreak of Russia's invasion of Ukraine, there was a sort of almost a denial, particularly in the West, that this played any role whatsoever in what had happened. And those of us who said it did play a role, while not apologising or excusing Putin's decision to attack Ukrainian sovereignty, were sort of sidelined as apologists. We now have this sort of even trickier situation in which, a country like Finland, who has, looking at what's going on, has quite significant security concerns. It's very understandable why they would want to become a NATO member, but it has geopolitical ramifications because if Russia and the West have had a kind of semi-informal position for a number of years of saying, you're not going to step over here and I'm not going to step over there. Of course, Russia has broken that informal agreement to some extent, then it's going to cause tensions. And I think Chip Chapman and other commentators highlight a very important point, which is that there's a lot of short-termist thinking in relation to what's going on. And we all want the war to be over as quickly as possible. But this isn't something that's going to go away for years, and the tensions are going to remain. And therefore, you do have to consider the wider geopolitical ramifications for any decision that's made, in particular in relation to NATO and Europe.
Yeah. I was going to say it's difficult to plan when you don't know who's won the war yet. But actually, if you think back to World War II, that happened quite a lot. The war was still on when I think Yalta happened. Actually, you can make plans even though the war's still going on. We better move on, but Ella, for now, thanks very much indeed. After the break, going to be joined by Gareth Wynne-Jones to talk about the struggles facing farmers this lambing season. But first, the weather.
Europe is in the grip of the most devastating humanitarian crisis since World War II.
The people of Ukraine are facing unimaginable suffering
as their homes are destroyed and their loved ones are killed.
Millions of people are being forced to flee for their lives, carrying only their children, their pets, and the clothes on their back.
The pain, loss and destruction grows by the day.
The people of Ukraine urgently need our help.
Already a vast humanitarian operation is underway. Britain's Disasters Emergency Committee, or DEC, brings together 15 leading aid charities to respond to overseas disasters quickly and efficiently. These charities include the British Red Cross, CARE, Oxfam, Save the Children and World Vision.
Their teams are working on the ground in Ukraine and neighbouring countries to bring vital aid to those who need it most. If you can spare it, your gift to the DEC's humanitarian appeal will go a really long way.
£10 provides essential hygiene supplies for a person for a month.
£50 provides blankets for 4 families.
£100 provides emergency food for 2 families per month.
It's easy to give. You can donate online at dec.org.uk or call the 24-hour donation line on 0370 60 60 900. If you prefer to send a cheque, please post it to the Ukraine Humanitarian Appeal, PO Box 999, London, EC 3A 3AA. To give £10 on your mobile, simply text the word crisis to 70150. Standard network charges apply for calls and you must be 16 or over. Texts are charged at the standard network rate and your £10 donation will be added to your bill.
100% of your donation goes directly to the DEC to save lives and deliver critical support where it's needed.
Now, the lambing season has begun in earnest, a busy and often uplifting time of the year for those who work or see the fruits of farming. This year has been difficult, however, for many farmers and shepherds. In Wales, for instance, the cost of running a hill farm has increased sharply over the last year, from the cost of sheep pellets to the price of fuel. Rising costs are really biting at many rural businesses, and there are fears there will be fewer lambs bred next year if those price hikes continue, with some farmers simply unable to afford the staples of feed and fuel. Farmer Gareth Wynne-Jones, popular tweeter, joins me now. Gareth, welcome to you. How's it going?
Yeah, it's good, actually. The weather's been good with us. And, you know, like every other year, we get our losses, few with the fox, few with the, the ravens and things. It's just nature. But the weather's been kind, and that's the main element for us outside. But the 4 Fs, I don't want to be bringing Fs onto live television, but, the fertiliser, the fuel and the feed. And we've got to remember one thing as well, the finances as well. Them 4 Fs are just crushing a lot of people at the moment. A lot of my friends are talking about cutting down to half of their stock. They're not going to be able to afford the fertiliser prices. We've gone up from £240 to £1,000 a tonne. Red diesel is doubled as well, from 50 pence to £1. And I'll just give you an example of the quad. It used to cost me £20 to fill the quad up, and it's costing me 35, and I use a tank every 2 days. It's a lot of cash going out.
It's essential to get around the terrain that you have to get around to reach your livestock. I just wonder, Gareth, you'll have seen the stories in recent weeks. Hill farmers, North Wales, West Wales, selling up, getting out. They're being offered lots of money by big corporate entities that want to offset their carbon and plant trees. Do you know anybody who's done that? And can you see the attraction of doing it and just solving at a stroke all your financial woes?
It's absolutely scary. It's taking away people that have lived on these farms for generations. Some of the estates, that are cashing in on this. And it's the same up in Scotland. I think every single government needs to look at it. It's going to be absolutely so serious and so important that we have food production and food security in this country, and planting flipping trees to offset some big company in Germany, France or whatever it is just moving the problem from them to us. And we're in deeper doo-doo then because we're not able to produce food. It's absolutely ridiculous. And if somebody said, they came here and offered us a lot of money to plant trees on the farm, I suppose if you're, in your 60s or 70s, no children following behind you, maybe it would be the sensible and the business thing to do. But I just think we can't have these incentives, and government should not be helping it because trees aren't the answer. We have to look at, sustainable ways of producing food in this country and done it environmentally friendly. So let's please stop this lunatics, buying out our farms and our land and planting trees on them.
Gareth, let's see what you think is part of the answer. I think we've got some pictures of your lambs on your farm, which we're going to play. We're going to play now, make everybody a lot happier. You got 5 Fs, by the way. You got flipping in a few moments ago. So it was 5 Fs after all.
I could have put another 2, food and farming.
Yeah. I just want to go just on the point about on food security. Do you think the country is waking up to the essential arithmetic now, which is that we only produce about half of the food we consume? And in a world, in a society where we have surely woken up to the fragility of supply chains in the wake of COVID, that people now realise that is a genuine strategic threat to the interest of the country?
Do you know what? I think people that are shopping in supermarkets are beginning to see it. And, we're very lucky. We've got social media, we've got Twitter, we've got Facebook, we've got Instagram, where we can share our stories. And people wouldn't understand how difficult it was only for that. The only people that aren't listening is governments themselves. The governments themselves aren't, seeing what's happening right in front of their eyes. We haven't got a tap that we can turn on. The dairy boys now are struggling. They're cutting back. They're giving less feed to their cows. That's going to piddle out now, and there's going to be less milk. They have to be paid the fair price. And let's not forget as well, Colin, there's people in this country that are on minimum wage and really struggling, and they need affordable food. And we should be there producing that in a sustainable and environmentally friendly way. And it's difficult, but when big companies are coming here and taking swathes of land to grow trees and all kinds of different solar panels and, build roads, every single inch of that productive land that's going out will never produce food again. Let's not forget that. We have to be very careful what we've got, and we need government backing going forward, Colin. We need it, and it's really serious, and it needs an ASAP.
Well, Gareth, you're a powerful and eloquent voice for just those sorts of types of subsidies we've talked about. Gareth Wyn-Jones, as ever, thanks very much indeed for your time. Ella Whelan, just to play devil's advocate, I mean, is it the case that just because you've got a family farm that's been in the family for generations that you've got a particular right to farm there? Or might it be the case that if a faceless corporation, Gareth was saying from the continent, say, actually, we've got an environmental mission to plant trees, what's to stop them doing that?
Well, of course, it can sound a bit sort of, that argument about families staying there can in one way sound a bit NIMBYistic and let's not change anything and almost Luddite. But there is a very serious discussion to be had about breaking up communities. And I know lots of, my in-laws are farmers, and there is a sense of, particularly parts of Devon just emptying out to not just empty holiday homes, but kind of creating soulless communities where no one has any link with each other. But also it'd be one thing if families were being kicked off the farms and then huge, efficient, food production orientated farming was coming in to do what Gareth was talking about, to revolutionise our food production in this country. That isn't what's happening. What's actually happening is farms are being made smaller and smaller, but partly because people can't afford it, but also because of the division of land and because people are selling off to plant trees, to institute solar panels and all the rest of it. And it just tells you something about the funny word sustainability. It gets thrown out around so much. And actually, when it comes to a very practical need of sustainability for sustaining food production in the country, keeping people eating meat, which there is, let's not forget, all the kind of vegan stuff and the fads that's been going on, most people's meat is still a central part of their diet in this country. And yet we are completely undermining any kind of sustainable plans for that to happen in the future.
I think your word fads might cause you a few problems online. But you knew that, didn't you?
Yes.
Ella, thanks very much indeed. It's gone 5 o'clock. Coming up live at 5, why a jury took only 30 minutes today to convict an Islamist who stabbed to death the MP, Sir David Amess. Mark White will discuss how we stop the killer using prison as a place to radicalise other inmates. Also, have eco-vandals just cooked their own goose? Was it naive of Just Stop Oil protesters to strangle petrol supplies just as the law to limit protests is going through Parliament? And as Brooklyn Beckham's nuptials rack up a £3 million bill, can some wedding ceremonies be too expensive? Alongside me throughout the show, the writer Ella Whelan. But first, the headlines with Polly.
Good afternoon. Just after 5 o'clock, I'm Polly Middlehurst in the GB newsroom. And the top story today, Ali Harbi Ali has been found guilty of murdering Sir David Amess. The 26-year-old repeatedly stabbed the Conservative MP in his Essex constituency last October. It took the jury just 18 minutes to return a unanimous verdict. He was also found guilty of preparing acts of terrorism and is due to be sentenced on Wednesday. Detective Superintendent Dominic Murphy says Ali was self-radicalised.
It's important to remember that Ali Harbi Ali's attack was an attack against democracy. Sir David was helping the community of Essex at the time of his murder. And so I hope this trial helps to bring some closure for the family.
Well, the two unarmed police officers who tackled Sir David's murderer have been given bravery awards. Essex Police say PC Ryan Curtis and PC Scott James were awarded the Merit Star in a private ceremony in November. The Austrian Chancellor has told the Russian President Vladimir Putin the conflict in Ukraine must end, telling him in a war there are only losers on both sides. Karl Nehammer is the first EU country leader to meet Vladimir Putin in Moscow since the invasion began. Ukraine, meanwhile, is bracing itself for a new attack in the east, with President Zelensky warning Russia is readying tens of thousands of troops for their next offensive. And new video has emerged showing the extent of damage at the National Theatre in Mariupol, which was destroyed during an airstrike, killing at least 300 people. A Conservative MP has been found guilty of sexually assaulting a 15-year-old boy at a house in Staffordshire in 2008. Southwark Crown Court heard how Imran Ahmad Khan forced the teenager to drink alcohol, drag him upstairs and then made him watch pornography before the assault. The Prime Minister's spokeswoman says Boris Johnson has agreed to the Chancellor's request of an independent review of his finances. That comes after it emerged Rishi Sunak held a US green card while in office and that his wife holds non-domicile status. He says he followed the rules and hopes the review will provide further clarity. But the Labour leader, Sir Keir Starmer, says the timing of the revelations couldn't be worse.
At the very time, in the middle of a cost of living crisis, when everybody is feeling the pinch, and last week the government said we're going to put up tax on working people, we now discover that members of the Cabinet have been using schemes to reduce their own tax. It's very, very straightforward. It's a real sense of fairness and transparency here that's in play.
Sir Keir Starmer. Well, from today, millions of people in the UK will see a rise in their state pensions, but it won't be enough to match the growing cost of living. Pensions and universal credit benefits have increased by 3.1%, but the Office for Budget Responsibility says inflation could hit a 40-year high of 8.7% later this year. These pensioners in Pontypool in South Wales say the financial boost just doesn't cover the cost of living.
The pension's going up maybe £4 a week if you're lucky. At the moment, my gas and electric has gone up £95, and that's not going to help me at all.
People are talking about heating or eating, that's the tagline, and I feel very strongly about that. As you get older, you need a warm house, you need good nutritional food, and it's not going to cover the cost.
pensioners in Pontypridd in Wales. Well, hundreds of food bank providers have written to Boris Johnson and the Chancellor, warning they're struggling to keep up with the relentless demand they're experiencing. The Independent Food Aid Network says the government must act urgently to combat rising levels of poverty and hunger across the UK. It says it's deeply concerned about the scale of suffering and that many families are at breaking point. The Easter bank holiday is expected to be on the busiest on the British roads in the last 8 years. The RAC estimates 21.5 million cars will set off between Good Friday and Easter Monday, and congestion hotspots over the break include the M6 North, the M25 clockwise and the A303. And that comes as air and rail travel is also disrupted by staff sickness and planned engineering work. Happy Easter. You're with GB News. More news as it happens. Now let's get back to Brazier.
Ali Harby Ali has been found guilty of murdering Sir David Amess. He stabbed the Southend MP more than 20 times, a court heard, and admitted being a terrorist in police interviews, despite denying murder later. It took the jury 30 minutes to decide he was an Islamist murderer. Mark White, our Home and Security editor, has this report.
Yes, we're TA, we're waiting.
Outside this Baptist church in Leigh-on-Sea, the first police arrived to reports of a horrific stabbing.
They say he's got a knife and he's just stabbed someone. He's got a knife, but he's allowing you to go in and see
Lying critically wounded inside the church, local MP Sir David Amess.
At the same time, we've got a taser unit 1 minute away, so we're going to go in and he's got a taser.
Just moments earlier, frantic 999 calls for help.
Please, quick now. The man is wielding a knife and he's threatening me. He's killed David Amess at Belfast Methodist Church.
With the attackers still inside, the unarmed officers decide they have to push forward.
Mate, drop the knife! Drop the knife now! Get it down! Right, search him.
With the attackers subdued, medics were finally able to reach the stricken MP. But Sir David died at the scene, having suffered more than 20 stab injuries. As he was booked into custody, terrorist Ali Harby Ali openly admitted his motivation.
Domestic or hate-related in any way? Pardon? Terror.
Earlier, CCTV captured him leaving his London home, heading for Sir David's regular constituency surgery. In his rucksack, the 12-inch-long murder weapon.
When I first came in,
Despite denying murder in court, in police interviews, the 26-year-old was more candid.
Mr. Ali, is this a terrorist attack?
I mean, I guess, yeah. I killed an MP and I've done it. Yeah. Okay.
Ali showed the first signs of radicalisation in 2014 and was briefly referred to counter-extremism programmes.
It's a reflection of the challenge we face in counter-terrorism today. So after 16 years as a counter-terrorism detective, the threat has diversified significantly. And if an individual is going to sit at home on their own, conducting research, and not tell anyone else about their case, that's part of the challenge that we face. But we do that with the family of those that have been radicalised, with the public, to take every attempt to disrupt and detect terrorism where we can.
Ali had been planning an attack for at least 5 years before he finally struck, scoping out a number of potential victims, including Cabinet Minister Michael Gove, even writing down possible methods of attack, like targeting him during his morning jog. Fellow Cabinet Minister Dominic Raab and Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer were also in his sights.
Southend should be the city of culture.
In the end, he settled on Sir David Amess, an easy target, always accessible to his constituents.
David was a very special person, and that is why there's been such a deep feeling of tragedy after his murder. This was no ordinary MP, this was someone who was completely dedicated to his job. And to lose someone like that, I think it's affected us all. It's certainly affected me very badly.
That feeling of profound loss was felt most keenly in Sir David's constituency, where locals developed a deep respect for a politician who dedicated much of his time to campaigning for Southend to gain city status. That mission completed posthumously. As he begins life behind bars, Sir David's killer has never shown any remorse for the murder of a much-loved and deeply respected Member of Parliament. Mark White, GB News.
Well, Ella Whelan is alongside me, who I'm sure, well, I know did a lot of reflecting and talking about this crime when it first happened. And Ella, many of our viewers will remember at the time, in the hours and days that followed the killing of Sir David, there was a lot of chat. There were conversations around the motivation, the cause. Was it hate speech? Was it the intemperance of language used by politicians? And there seemed to be a gap between what politicians were saying at the time and what the general public suspected, which was it was terror all along, guys.
Yes, and I think most of us who were watching knew that it had even though we couldn't, for legal reasons, say anything definitively, and certainly commentators and people doing broadcasts couldn't call out what they thought was quite obvious, which was that it was terror-related, but it had all the hallmark signs of it. And I think it's a real serious problem. You just had that police chief in Mark's report talking about the fact that this shows what we need to learn about counter-terrorism. The issue of Islamist terrorism has been with us for quite a while now, and I'm not a specialist. I'm not here to kind of wag the finger and say people should be quicker at it. But it's this particular type of crime is clouded and shrouded in a kind of almost enforced secrecy and a sort of a hush-hush mentality, which is that if you have an open discussion about the problems with Islamist terrorism, there is the potential for you to stray into Islamophobia, for example, and therefore no one really wants to talk about it. It's almost a taboo subject. And that is a real problem, particularly in the case of Sir David Amess, in which I think there was a real injustice done after his murder, in which no one was talking about the real thing that was happening. And I think there was a lot of, if I wanted to be really unkind, kind of hobby horsing going along, where particular politicians and commentators use this as a means to play their own game, particularly in a very similar way that Joe Cox's murder was used by some people to kind of slander Brexit.
You know, Ella, some people say, well, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter that at the time we didn't get to the nub of the problem. You'll get to it in a few months when justice is served and the court case is finished. That's not how life works, actually. You've got to deal with things there and then, not in the instant, but around the time generally, and we're talking about within days. You need to have the honest conversation within days of it happening, because if you leave it months, nobody cares very much, or cares less than they would have done.
And also we know that mistruths fester and have a lasting impact. I mean, it's funny that in a political context where everybody's so obsessed with fake news and getting the facts straight, that when it comes to looking at either, back in recent history, the attack on Charlie Hebdo in Paris, or whether it's what happened to, say, David Amess or the Manchester bombing, that we often find ourselves, or commentators find themselves, reaching for every other possible explanation for what's happened, other than looking at the issue of Islamist terror in the face and talking about how we can deal with it, because it's a tricky issue. What is the answer? Is it to do with the way people are raised? Is it to do with the kind of beliefs they have? What is it about British values that are so abhorrent to people? I'm not saying that's an easy or comfortable conversation to have, but it's clearly one that we need to have, or else it ends up feeling like we don't care about what happened to David Amess. It's not that big an issue. Let's just let it fade into the background. And it's not just because he's an MP. I think because it's another instance of showing that this issue of Islamist terrorism is not going away.
Ella, for now, thanks very much. Well, Emmanuel Macron has won the first round of the French election, and right-wing rival Marine Le Pen will fight him for the presidency for a second time. Macron told his supporters, "Make no mistake, nothing is decided." In the end, he won a convincing first-round victory, but at least one opinion poll suggesting the runoff, could be very close indeed. 49%, 51% said won. Ms. Le Pen called on every non-Macron voter to join her and put France back in order. Joining us now, Paris-based journalist David Chazan. David, welcome to you. It's nice to talk to you again. I was thinking this morning about something I read, I think, from William Hague, former British Foreign Secretary, 3 years ago, and a man not given to making wild leaps of conjecture, but this really stayed with me. I think it was about 3 or 4 years ago, And he said the next presidential election will see Marine Le Pen elected. I hope I'm not misquoting him. I apologise if I am. And he said it was such clarity and conviction, it stayed with me. And at the time, I dismissed it. But actually, it really could happen.
It certainly could, yes, Colin. The one poll that you just quoted actually puts the two contenders who'll face each other in the runoff within the margin of error. So there's everything to play for, and Mr. Macron himself has recognised that. His strategy now appears to be to reach out to left-wing voters. Now, he largely lost his left-wing support during his term in office over the past 5 years. He came in as someone who was seen as a centrist, who had served as a minister in a socialist-led government, but now he's seen as more of a centre-right figure, and he knows that he is going to have to pick up some of the 20% of votes that went to the far-left candidate, Jean-Luc Mélenchon. Mr. Mélenchon has instructed his supporters not to give a single vote to Marine Le Pen, but it's thought that up to a third of them may disobey that instruction. So it's a very, very fluid situation.
Yeah, interesting that some on the hard left are attracted, it would seem, to some of her economic policies, which are not exactly what you describe as Thatcherite. David, one poll result that really shocked me was the extent to which, maybe I misread it, but you'll know better than I, that young people are getting behind Marine Le Pen.
Yeah, that's right. A lot of her voters are pretty young. Most of them tend to live in the smaller towns or villages. She appeals to people who feel left out, who feel that Emmanuel Macron is, as his critics describe him, president of the rich. They feel that they've got limited opportunities, and so they're looking for somebody who they believe can really change things. Now, by French standards, the turnout was fairly low in the first round. More than a quarter of registered voters stayed home, and it's thought that that may have favoured Emmanuel Macron because many of Marine Le Pen's voters are young and tend to be lower income, and that's two categories that tend to vote less than better off people who tend to support Emmanuel Macron.
David, there would have been a time, the idea of countenancing a French Republic led by Marine Le Pen would have been, I think I read some seasoned commentator saying at one time, it was almost an open invitation to a kind of civil war in France. She's toned things down since then. Picture, if you would, in a minute and 30 seconds, what a France led by Marine Le Pen might look like.
Well, I think, first of all, she would probably govern with people from what's traditionally been the mainstream centre-right party, now known as the Republicans, the equivalent of the Tories in the UK, if you like. Now, some people on the right of the party would probably be willing to go into a Le Pen-led government. It's very unlikely that she could win a parliamentary majority with her party, the National Rally, so she would need people from the other parties. And although the Republican candidate did dismally badly, got less than 5% of the vote in the first round, the party may do better in the parliamentary elections, which are coming up in June. Now, what Marine Le Pen wants to do, she's promising tax cuts. She says that no one under the age of 30 should pay income tax. And she also, this may have resonance with GBNews viewers, she wants to abolish the French equivalent of the licence fee, which isn't collected by the national broadcaster, but which is collected along with other tax. But then so does Emmanuel Macron. But Marine Le Pen is still vulnerable to critics who say that her economic policies don't add up, because she's essentially promising tax cuts, but more public spending. But She's focused her whole campaign on the cost of living. Over the past few years, she's moderated her party's image and her own image. She's toned down her anti-immigrant rhetoric. And so she's been trying to make herself more acceptable to people more in the centre ground who she knows she needs to win this election.
David Shazad, thanks for your time. Thanks very much indeed. Ella Whelan is alongside me. David perhaps answered my question about why she seems to be newly popular with the young. Not paying income tax until you're 30 might be one reason.
Certainly, but we also make, I think we underestimate the effect of Macron's failure to, what he said in 2017 was, I am coming in to be the smasher of populism. I am the kind of technocratic, his nickname was Little Pluto or something like that. He was the man who was going to come
quite a few nicknames.
And put right all the kind of messy stuff that was going on in Europe and particularly in France. And what we've seen over the last years since 2017 has been the way in which he treated, for example, the Gilets jaunes and police officers in Paris and in other parts of France, literally cracking heads of protesters who are talking about the fact that both the cost of living crisis and fuel prices in France is making life unlivable for people. He's failed to get a handle on anything really in relation to kind of what I would say is a positive populist upsurge in France. And so in the same way that maybe Trump or other leaders have, it's not necessarily because there's anything particularly about Le Pen or that people, in fact, do go along with her, even if it's toned down, still quite extreme anti-immigrant sentiment among her views. It's because it's an expression of a kind of anything but Macron outlook. David makes a very important point about the levels of turnout in France. It's
much quite high.
But
75%.
Yeah, but if you look at the way in which Macron suffered previously, in that there was a huge amount of spoiled ballots in his first initial election, we could see a return of that now come around in the next 2 weeks, because there is particularly with the fall away of Mélenchon, people are forced to pick between a rock and a hard place, the best of two bad options. And I think lots of people will decide to sit back from that. And, I think that is as much a political stance as is picking between Macron and Le Pen.
OK. Ella, for now, thanks very much. Coming up, the radical eco-protest group Just Stop Oil, currently have been blocking roads in parts of the country. Will talk to us. First, here's the weather.
Hello again, I'm Aidan McGivern from the Met Office. Warmer and drier weather is on the way for many of us this weekend, but for the time being it's cloudy out there, it's breezy, and there is some rain or showers to talk about. Low pressure at the moment controlling things, and that's sitting out towards the southwest. Ahead of that low, weather fronts are moving in. Now these are generally showery features, but could bring some more persistent rain at times to Northern Ireland, central and southern Scotland, northern England. Even more so as we head through the night, an area of rain enlarging across eastern Scotland with some persistent wet weather here, and then further showers move up from the near continent with the odd rumble of thunder for Wales and the southwest. But it's a mild night, 10 to 12 Celsius in the south, 5 to 6 further north. Frost-free start to Tuesday for virtually everyone, but a gloomy start, a lot of low cloud, mistiness out there, areas of rain moving north, so that by the afternoon it's much of central and eastern Scotland, northern and eventually central and eastern England that sees the more persistent weather. Further west and further southwest, brighter skies, some sunny spells coming through, and 17 or 18 Celsius, but a few showers will break out even in the west and the southwest by the afternoon and early evening. The more persistent wet weather, though, eases away from eastern and northern England. It sticks around for eastern Scotland, pushing into the Northern Isles by the end of Tuesday night. Clear spells for some further south, but a lot of cloud cover. And again, some mist and murk, particularly around western and southern shores. So a gloomy start to Wednesday for many, and a damp start there for the far north and northeast of Scotland. 1 or 2 showers as we begin things, but through the day on Wednesday, skies brighten, the sun comes through, and we'll see more widely scattered showers breaking out. Thursday, many places dry away from the far west.
Join me, Nana Akua, on Fridays, Saturdays and Sunday afternoons here on GB News. Expect fiery debate and passionate discussion as my panel and I take on some of the top stories hitting the headlines.
You can look up the statistics.
No, you look it up. I hug everyone I We learn from it and try and move on. That's it. Opinion is at the heart of the show. It's a place for open and frank conversation, but without the fear of cancellation. So join me here on GB News on Friday, Saturday and Sunday afternoons between 4 and 6 p.m.
Europe is in the grip of the most devastating humanitarian crisis since World War II.
The people of Ukraine are facing unimaginable suffering
as their homes are destroyed and their loved ones are killed.
Millions of people are being forced to flee for their lives, carrying only their children, their pets, and the clothes on their back.
The pain, loss and destruction grows by the day.
The people of Ukraine urgently need our help.
Already a vast humanitarian operation is underway. Britain's Disasters Emergency Committee, or DEC, brings together 15 leading aid charities to respond to overseas disasters quickly and efficiently. These charities include the British Red Cross, CARE, Oxfam, Save the Children and World Vision.
Their teams are working on the ground in Ukraine and neighbouring countries to bring vital aid to those who need it most. If you can spare it, your gift to the DEC's humanitarian appeal will go a really long way.
£10 provides essential hygiene supplies for a person for a month.
£50 provides blankets for 4 families.
£100 provides emergency food for 2 families per month.
It's easy to give. You can donate online at dec.org.uk or call the 24-hour donation line on 0370 60 60 900. If you prefer to send a cheque, please post it to the Ukraine Humanitarian Appeal, PO Box 999, London, EC 3A 3AA. To give £10 on your mobile, simply text the word crisis to 70150. Standard network charges apply for calls and you must be 16 or over. Texts are charged at the standard network rate and your £10 donation will be added to your bill.
100% of your donation goes directly to the DEC to save lives and deliver critical support where it's needed.
Couple of minutes away from 5:30, you're with GB News. More than a dozen environmental activists were arrested at the weekend as they sought to block oil supplies. Essex police say the actions of an organisation styling itself Just Stop Oil, it's an offshoot of Extinction Rebellion, had cost taxpayers £1 million. That was just in Essex. The protest did cause some shortages on petrol station forecourts, but they appear to have been less serious than initially was thought. But if the demonstrators failed to block supplies, did they succeed in making it easier for the government to block such protests in the future? I ask this because the Police Crime Sentencing and Courts Bill is in the final stages of parliamentary scrutiny, and if any parliamentarian had doubts about introducing tough new laws against disruptive protests, then perhaps they may well have been swept away on a wave of public revulsion about these latest actions. Joining me now, a spokesman for Just Stop Oil, that is Kenny Alexander. Kenny Alexander, appreciate your time. Before we get into, I'm sure you're keen to make the bigger cases about the need to uphold the values your organisation represents, but just in terms of the tactics of what's been happening in recent days and weeks, do you accept the argument that just as the Police Crime and Sentencing Bill is going through its latest stage of parliamentary scrutiny, might tactically be a naive time to remind people of why that bill needs to be enacted?
Why that bill needs to be enacted, I think that's a bit wrong. Look, the Just Stop Oil Coalition don't want to be here either. We're just normal people trying to get the government to act upon the demand that they must stop all new oil and gas licences right now. This is the government's own promises we're asking them to keep. We don't want to be doing this. And further restrictions on the civil liberties of people, do you want to go back in time?
Kenny, what do you say to those people, though? I mean, I know it's slightly moot just the extent to which there were problems on the forecourts of the south of England this weekend. Initial reports suggested there were some serious problems. But we do know, don't we, that protests like this clearly have the capacity to lead to shortages on forecourts. And when that happens, the people you end up punishing are, we can list them, can't we? We can think of people in isolated rural areas. And you and I can certainly agree on the fact there ought to be provision for those people to use public transport. It's not there. They need their cars. And if they need their cars, they need to fill up their cars. And you're trying to stop them doing that.
Really? The fact that filling a car with petrol, do you live in the real world? Most people I know can't afford to fill their car with petrol right now. This government needs to get a grip. It needs to act right away. It needs to grasp the nettle and move towards renewables, move towards free public transport, and move away from this addiction to fossil fuels. I worked in the oil and gas industry for 35 years. That's how I made a living. And the society has become addicted to such a degree that we feel that we need it, and yet we know that it's a finite resource.
Yeah.
We're stealing from the next generation, and we're killing the planet in doing so.
Yeah. I did a story last week, Kenny Alexander, about the fact that if you look at the league table of the best-selling British cars right now, Tesla are in places 1 and 2. That's a function of technological advances. It's a function of some incentives, financial incentives that have been put in place by governments to encourage people to switch to electric cars. These processes are happening already, some would say. Why does it become necessary to disrupt people going around to their lawful business? If your protests end up in people not...
I would say that these things should have came along 30 years ago.
The hospital and schools, often very poorly paid people who need their cars to get around.
They need their cars to get around. You're trying to align yourself with normal working people, whereas you don't live in the normal working people's world.
You have no idea what world I live in. I'm asking legitimate
left
questions.
behind
I'd
with
answer
this.
them rather than playing
If you ask me a question that, you should let me finish,
Go on.
Nobody should be left behind with this. What we need is a just transition over to a society, a much more fair society. And the super wealthy people that are making an awful lot of money out of this reliance, a false reliance upon oil and gas that we've been conned into, they should be paying for this transition. They should be paying for the move over towards electric transport. Look, I'm very lucky. I've skied all over the world, travelled a lot. I've had a really lucky life, but that's not going to be around for my child when he's my age. You've got kids. What are you telling your kids about what's coming to them in 20 years' time? Do you know what like a 2-degree world's going to be?
Do I know what, Kenny?
The government has accepted a 2-degree temperature rise. They've accepted that right now.
I have vigorous conversations around my dining table with my children who are as concerned as any other children about global warming. My question, as I go back to where we started, my question is about tactics. This is a raging argument that's been advanced in lots of different ways, using lots of different methods, and I would argue to a great degree very successfully. I question, and I recommend there's a fantastic column in the Times this morning by somebody who's a liberal commentator, saying that very often these tactics backfire. Maybe not necessarily yours necessarily, but we think back to Insulate Britain, and we think back to some of the public disapproval that went with that. And I sat through.
Okay, I see the point that you're making. We don't have long.
People, ambulances being blocked by protesters from getting to hospitals.
Well, you like that one,
It backfires, Kenny.
No, you make it backfire. The only way that we can get on here, look, the only way that our voices get heard, we try everything. How many petitions have you tried? How many times have you lettered your MP? The only way that we get heard is by these people putting themselves on a line. And
okay.
There's people even on hunger strike to try and get the voice heard, trying to get the message across.
Are you prepared to accept an alternative vision of what's happening here, which is that there actually are loads of people? You've won the argument. You persuade the majority of people that your vision is the right one. And then they see pictures the likes of which we've just been broadcasting now, and they have doubts. Because they
no, you're wrong.
They are aligned.
You're wrong. I live in a liberal society. Look, I've got an 85-year-old mother and a 25-year-old son. They don't see any of this on the news because you people within the media are disinforming them, misinforming them, and malinforming them. They think that this is all going to be. They don't go shaking your eyes because you're a journalist. I'm just an ex-oil and gas worker. You know the difference between disinformation, misinformation, and malinformation. Could you just explain to the readers what net zero really means? Because Boris made some promises on net zero. I've got them all written down here. Would you like to hear what Boris says about net zero?
We haven't got time. Kenny, we appreciate your time.
We're running out of time. We've got a rapidly closing window to make a difference.
Kenny Alexander, we appreciate you coming on. Thanks for your patience. Thanks very much indeed. Ella Whelan's alongside me. Shall I show you what an eye roll looks like? I don't know how you shake your eyes, but this is an eye roll. Okay. He's very passionate about his cause.
Yes.
I think, honestly, that a lot of people have been switched off the cause he advances by the tactics they've used. You make a study of protest. What works?
Well, we know, I mean, one of the central things about protests is the aim is always, a good protest is to be very disruptive, but a good protest is also the aim to win public support on your side, that you pull people in from the street, you ask people to join them, you have a popular campaign. And we know that, particularly in relation to Extinction Rebellion, Insulate Britain and now Just Stop Oil, the central focus of so much of their argument is that they do not want to win over popular support. That this is, we've heard in particular in relation to Extinction Rebellion, that democracy doesn't work when it comes to the climate. There's no debate on this. Shut up and listen to the science. And it's not just the fact that people are gluing themselves to roads and stopping ambulances and doing all the things you described, which is a problem, but it's also this kind of two fingers to the public which says, we don't really want to engage with you. It's hard not to kind of be scornful listening to Kenny because he's talking about the fact that there's a kind of elitist discussion about what working people do or don't want. So much of the climate change discussion is about threatening the quality of life of working people and also ignoring them when it comes to their political views. So who's the real enemy of the people, to use that terrible phrase?
Well, you did. Ella, thanks very much indeed. Let's get you the bulletin now with Polly.
Ali Harbi Ali has been found guilty of murdering Sir David Amess. The 26-year-old repeatedly stabbed the Conservative MP in his Essex constituency last October. It took a jury just 18 minutes to return a unanimous verdict. Ali was also found guilty of preparing acts of terrorism and is due to be sentenced on Wednesday. The Austrian Chancellor says his meeting with Vladimir Putin in Moscow was direct, open and tough. It's the first time an EU leader has held face-to-face talks with Russia's president since the war started. Meanwhile, Ukraine is bracing itself for a new attack in the east of the country, with President Zelensky warning Russia is readying tens of thousands of troops for their next offensive. In the north, rescuers are searching through rubble for those missing in a town near Kyiv. And President Zelensky says the situation in Borodyanka is significantly more dreadful than in nearby Bucha, where locals say dozens of civilians were killed by Russian troops. A Conservative MP has been found guilty of sexually assaulting a 15-year-old boy at a house in Staffordshire in 2008. Southwark Crown Court heard how Imran Ahmed Khan forced the teenager to drink and then watch pornography before the assault took place. From today, millions of people in the UK will see a rise in their state pensions, but analysts say it won't be enough to match the growing cost of living. Pensions and universal credit benefits have increased by 3.1%, but the Office for Budget Responsibility says inflation could hit 8.7% later this year. And hundreds of food bank providers have written to the Prime Minister and the Chancellor, warning they're struggling to keep up with the relentless demand they're experiencing. The Independent Food Aid Network says the government must act urgently to combat rising levels of poverty and hunger across the UK. On TV, online and on your radio via DAB+, you're with GB News. More from Brazier after the break.
Europe is in the grip of the most devastating humanitarian crisis since World War II.
The people of Ukraine are facing unimaginable suffering
as their homes are destroyed and their loved ones are killed.
Millions of people are being forced to flee for their lives, carrying only their children, their pets, and the clothes on their back.
The pain, loss and destruction grows by the day.
The people of Ukraine urgently need our help.
Already a vast humanitarian operation is underway. Britain's Disasters Emergency Committee, or DEC, brings together 15 leading aid charities to respond to overseas disasters quickly and efficiently. These charities include the British Red Cross, CARE, Oxfam, Save the Children and World Vision.
Their teams are working on the ground in Ukraine and neighbouring countries to bring vital aid to those who need it most. If you can spare it, your gift to the DEC's humanitarian appeal will go a really long way.
£10 provides essential hygiene supplies for a person for a month.
£50 provides blankets for 4 families.
£100 provides emergency food for 2 families per month.
It's easy to give. You can donate online at dec.org.uk or call the 24-hour donation line on 0370 60 60 900. If you prefer to send a cheque, please post it to the Ukraine Humanitarian Appeal, PO Box 999, London, EC 3A 3AA. To give £10 on your mobile, simply text the word crisis to 70150. Standard network charges apply for calls and you must be 16 or over. Texts are charged at the standard network rate and your £10 donation will be added to your bill.
100% of your donation goes directly to the DEC to save lives and deliver critical support where it's needed.
Here's another question for you. Can you spend too much on a wedding? £3 million, the reported cost to the celebrations to mark the union of Brooklyn Beckham, son of footballer David, and his new wife, Nicola Peltz. 300 guests were there for the ceremony, apparently, which took place at the Peltz family's Palm Beach estate, and the first pictures of which were released today. Well, some will say that spending millions on a wedding does not guarantee a happy marriage. Few might argue that expenditure on that scale is out of step in a world facing a cost of living crisis. But surely, whatever else, we ought to acknowledge that if people are fabulously wealthy, spending it on caterers, dressmakers, photographers, the whole 9 yards is a good thing. Money, after all, makes the world go round, doesn't it? To debate this, Liz Taylor, CEO of the Taylor Lynn Corporation, an event management company, and Harry Benson, Research Director at the Marriage Foundation. Welcome to you both and appreciate your time.
Good afternoon.
Opposing views on this in a polite way, I'm sure. Liz Taylor, what's your view? Money well spent.
Well, first of all, if you've got the solution to a happy marriage, I'd like you to share it with us all now, because it's not money driven, that is for sure. I think it depends on the individual. I don't think it's for any of us to judge how much people spend. A lot of people that do spend a lot on weddings, and my biggest spend was 1.75 million for a client about 8 years ago, are very philanthropic. And so therefore they don't just, they invest it, they're charitable. The world at the moment is a very challenging place, and there is we're surrounded by a lot of tragedy. But if I'm really honest, for what they seemed to have had, 3.9 million does not seem a lot of money for the production that they had in Palm Beach at the weekend.
That's interesting. I have to say, I think I felt that to be true as well when I looked at some of the pictures. And we know these things can run away cost-wise, can't we? We'll come back to the event itself and the cost of these things, but just in terms, Harry Benson, of the philosophy, it's important to make a distinction between a wedding, the ceremony, the big day, and how wonderful that might be, and the what often can be quite the humdrum but important institution of marriage, based over years, and where two people come together in an act of union, apt for the raising of children.
I mean, however you do it, and this is completely over the top,
wedding, and good luck to them. If they've got the money, then go for it. But there is a real point to weddings, and the point that there's some good psychology behind it, and it boils down to social affirmation and accountability. When you get married, you're taking an enormous risk to say yes to one person, and you're burning all of your bridges with everybody else. You're saying no to the rest of the world. And when you take that risk, you want other people to pat you on the head and say, great choice. And I remember my own wedding day was back in 1986, so 35 odd years ago. And I remember having the worst attack of nerves on the morning of my wedding day that I think I've ever had. And for a few years before that, I'd been flying into battle in the Falklands War as a helicopter pilot. And it was worse than that. But when I walked in and I saw my friends and my family, then essentially they were saying to me, without saying it, great choice, Harry, you've made a fantastic choice. And of course, they're also holding you to account as well. So that's part of the commitment process. Having those friends saying you've made a great choice is really important. And I think it's one of the reasons why people who marry tend to be more likely to stay together than those who don't, because they've got this sort of accountability and affirmation behind them. So good luck to them. They've gone over the top, but they've done the right thing.
Yeah, and they've got money to spend, and they should spend it. It's wonderful they're spending it.
Absolutely.
People, as Liz will explain, who are, contracted in to help put on a show like this. Liz, just got on a slightly different tack. I think he's 23, she's 27. I mean, that makes them, I think the average age for marriage in this country is at least 30. It makes them relatively young newlyweds, doesn't it?
It does make them young, but then his parents married young, and we all have an opinion whether it's Marmite, you like Victoria Beckham or don't you? But just very quickly, and this is I wrote a book during lockdown called Tailor Made, and in the book is the story of the phone call that I got from Jackie Adams, who was Posh's mum, and how I actually never did the wedding. So it's definitely worth a read. They are young, but there is no justification, there is no guarantee. I've been married more than once and unsuccessfully. They seem to be level-headed. I think that both their parents are still together. Well, no, actually hers isn't. I don't think age has anything to do with it. It certainly doesn't have anything to do with what you spend on the wedding. What you spend on the wedding is your prerogative, and there are so many options out there. I mean, I'm involved in a luxury market where I'm buying table centres in at £1,000, £1,500 a table. But if you came to me and said, you know what, I've got £500 to spend, I want something really fabulous for my wedding, then I would come to you with something that was mega and made it memorable. But I'm dealing in intangible items, and it's very hard for me to justify the spend other than to say that it's everyone's prerogative.
Harry, do you worry a little bit that people get sucked into this arms race and end up spending more than they would actually have liked to, and in so doing, neglect the kitty for the deposit on the property, neglect putting aside a fund that maybe allows them to do the important things, for instance, like having a family?
Yeah, I mean, apparently there's a Netflix thing called Marriage or Mortgage for a good reason. I mean, if you're sucked into this idea that you have to spend a fortune on weddings, I mean, ironically, I think much of that whole trend started with the famous Beckham wedding back in the 90s. I mean, we did a survey of 2,000 adults last year for Marriage Foundation, and 2,000 adults who'd ever married at some stage. Some of them married more recently than others. And we asked them how much they'd spent on their wedding. And the sort of the conventional wisdom is that 30 grand is the average. It's nothing like that. It's somewhere between 5,000 and 10,000. And we found that 4% of the people in the survey had spent over 30 grand. So, yes, there is an arms race, definitely. And also that there is a sort of, there's a mild link to divorce, to extra divorce rates if you spend a lot of money. We found that people who'd spent over 20 grand were statistically more likely to have got divorced. It wasn't a huge link. And there's also definitely a link with celebrity weddings. We've done studies on celebrity weddings. They have roughly double the divorce rate of the rest of us. So, they're spending a lot of money on the wedding is certainly no guarantee. Being a celebrity definitely works against you. Having parents who are together, terrific. I mean, and getting married in the first place, of course, actually improves your odds compared to not getting married. So, there's swings and roundabouts. You can't predict who's going to do well, but the arms race has definitely been going on for a long time, and it's certainly exacerbated by the big wedding industry that wants us to believe that you have to spend an absolute fortune. You know, back in the 70s and before, everybody got married, rich and poor alike, and we didn't spend fortunes on our weddings. But now we feel this pressure to do so.
Harry Benson, I'm just going to give Liz Taylor the final word on this. I mean, because I think you would reject the idea that there is that pressure that the industry is applying to people. You've already said as much.
I don't think I'm going to let Harry do my marketing for me, that is for sure. And that's said in the nicest possible way. But what I would say to you is it's how you spend the money and it's not how much you spend. And I've taken that right through my entire working life. So yes, I'm involved in a luxury market. I work with people that are privileged enough to spend whatever they want to spend, but it's how you spend it. And that's what's important. And I don't believe that divorce has anything to do with what you spend on your wedding. I believe it's on making the right choice. And we could have this debate forever, and there is no right and wrong, but everyone has a choice.
Liz Taylor, Harry Benson, I'm glad we had the debate. It was interesting. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Ella Whelan is alongside me. Your thoughts, Ella?
Well, weddings are expensive, even if you're not going as lavish as the Beckhams. I mean, I remember when I was planning mine, and you realise that what it costs to get the registrar in, and then we didn't go down the religious route, and then to hire a venue in London, and also we want, every good wedding. In my book anyway, people have to be fairly boozed up and have a good amount of food. And the price of pints in London is not insurmountable. So, it all adds up. But I think there is a point to suggesting that, celebrity weddings like the Beckhams, 80% of it is putting on a show for the public. It's not really about yourself. They're celebrities.
Glow magazine a bit?
Yeah, that's what they're there for. We want them to put on a show. And, I went down the aisle in a Oxfam dress that arrived in a bin bag, but it was wonderful and I loved it. I don't think I'd probably want her to wear that because you want to see the glamour and you don't have the money to spend it, you want someone else to. But I think the institution of marriage is something that doesn't get talked about very often. It's become, particularly among young people, it's much more unlikely that they are going to get married than their previous generations. And I'm not saying that's necessarily a bad thing, but when it comes to weddings, the central thing is about declaring your love for each other in front of your friends and family, not the party.
As Harry made clear, didn't he? Now, who should decide our nation's policy on COVID? Obviously, people at the sharp end have their voices, and the unions, which represent doctors and nurses, haven't been shy of criticising how government has handled or mishandled the pandemic. Ultimately, it's for the politicians we elect to make the big calls about lockdown-style measures. So how does an entity like the NHS Confederation fit into this? It's a charity which, as I understand it, benefits indirectly from taxpayer funding, but that doesn't stop it challenging ministerial decisions as it did today. Our question then, is that appropriate? The head of lifestyle economics at the IEA is Christopher Snowdon. Christopher, welcome to you. Can the NHS Confederation reasonably make the case that it's made today?
No, I'm not sure why it's made it, but they've been making it. And I say it's been Matthew Taylor, who is the head of this organisation, formerly head of the Royal Society of Arts, formerly a Blair advisor, also a guest on Radio 4's Moral Maze, a man of many talents, clearly. He's been, since October, I think was the first time he piped up and said we need to bring in Plan B just before cases went into sustained fall. Cases are almost certainly falling quite rapidly at the moment. The number of hospital admissions has been declining the last few days. So it looks like this wave is very much on its way out as well. But for some reason, he feels the need to keep popping up on television saying much the same thing, usually without any real detail about exactly what he wants. There's some suggestion he thinks people should stop meeting indoors. Presumably he wants face masks. These people always want face masks. But there's never any kind of cost and benefit analysis to this. It's just, look, the NHS is quite busy. We think we should restrict people's freedom.
The NHS Confederation, I emailed them and they said, look, just to be clear, we're not talking about we're not arguing for a restoration of lockdown or legal powers behind it. We are merely urging certain measures. I just want to, this got my goat a little bit because it did seem to be about an institution using taxpayers' money to criticise our elected officials. But actually, I just wonder if my analysis holds water, really. I mean, we interview lots of clinicians, doctors, both sides of the argument. They're taxpayer funded. What's the difference?
Well, I don't think they're getting government grants as such. They have an income of about £15 million, or at least did do last year, of which £11 or £12 million comes from the government in the form of contracts and services. I've been unable to find out what these contracts and services are. I dare say a lot of them are things like conferencing and so on. I mean, I'd never even heard of NHS Confederation until before the pandemic. I'm sure maybe some people had. I'd heard of NHS providers, and they seem to do something similar. There's various organisations like this, and it seems to me that this particular one is just another leech kind of sucking off the bloated body of the NHS. I mean, there's a huge amount of money swishing around for these organisations. They've got quite a lot of it, and every now and again they come popping up on TV telling us that we need to get it out of our heads that we should be free forevermore after COVID. They said it's an interesting use of words. Actually, he said the government hasn't got a COVID plan. It's got a restriction-free ideology, as if being allowed to meet people indoors is an ideology as opposed to normality.
Christopher Stone, we've got to leave it there. We're out of time, but thanks for yours very much indeed. We'll try and get the NHS Confederation's point of view. Maybe Matthew Taylor, who knows? Ella Whelan used to be with him on the BBC Radio 4's Moral Maze.
Yeah, we're colleagues on the Moral Maze, so I sound off a lot about what I think about restrictions. So just because you are not a medical professional doesn't mean you can't have an opinion. But Christopher is right to suggest that whether or not the government listens to Matthew Taylor will be the real crux of the matter.
Thanks for coming in today. Really appreciate it. Ella Whelan, thanks for watching. Thanks for your time too. Up next, Views and Co.
Hello again, I'm Aidan McGivern from the Met Office. Warmer and drier weather is on the way for many of us this weekend, but for the time being it's cloudy out there, it's breezy, and there is some rain or showers to talk about. Low pressure at the moment controlling things, and that's sitting out towards the southwest. Ahead of that low, weather fronts are moving in. Now these are generally showery features, but could bring some more persistent rain at times to Northern Ireland, central and southern Scotland, northern England. Even more so as we head through the night, an area of rain enlarging across eastern Scotland with some persistent wet weather here. And then further showers move up from the near continent with the odd rumble of thunder for Wales and the southwest. But it's a mild night, 10 to 12 Celsius in the south, 5 to 6 further north, frost-free start to Tuesday for virtually everyone, but a gloomy start, a lot of low cloud, mistiness out there, areas of rain moving north so that by the afternoon it's much of central and eastern Scotland, northern and eventually central and eastern England that sees the more persistent weather. Further west and further southwest, brighter skies, some sunny spells coming through and 17 or 18 Celsius, but a few showers will break out even in the west and the southwest by the afternoon and early evening. The more persistent wet weather